Welcome to Forbidden Files. On March 9, 1974, nearly 29 years after the end of World War II, a Japanese soldier emerged from a jungle on a small Philippine island, still wearing his Imperial Army uniform, still carrying his rifle, still believing the war was ongoing. He had been fighting alone, completely alone, for the last 2 years, and the only reason he stopped was not because he learned the war had ended. It was because his former commanding officer flew from Japan to the island and personally ordered him to stand down. Without that order, he would not have stopped. Lubang Island, a small island approximately 93 miles southwest of Manila, roughly 17 miles long, covered in dense jungle, coconut groves, and rice paddies, home to a few thousand Filipino farmers and fishermen. And from December 1944 until March 1974, the private battleground of one man who did not know the war he was fighting had been over for almost 3 decades. Hiro Onoda was born on March 19, 1922, in a small village in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. He came from a family with deep military roots. His father had served as a cavalry sergeant in the Second Sino-Japanese War. "I was always defiant and stubborn in everything I did," Onoda would later say of himself. At 18, he enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Army. By 1944, he had been singled out for special intelligence training at the Futamata branch of the Nakano Military School, a facility that specialized in commando units, guerrilla warfare, covert operations, and psychological resilience. He was being trained not just to fight, but to keep fighting when everything around him collapsed. In December 1944, Lieutenant Hiro Onoda arrived on Lubang Island. He was 22 years old. The war was already going badly for Japan. American forces were pushing back across the Pacific. The Philippines were being retaken. Onoda's mission: hold Lubang Island, disrupt the American advance, destroy the airfield and harbor. And before he left for the island, a general gave him words that would define the next 30 years of his life. Lieutenant General Akira Muto told him, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Until then, so long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him." These words were not unusual in the context of 1944 Japanese military culture. They were the standard instruction to a soldier being sent behind enemy lines. But Onoda would hold on to them with a literalness that no one who gave them had intended. For 29 years and 3 months, medium pause. By February 1945, American and Philippine forces had taken Lubang Island. Most Japanese defenders were killed or surrendered. Onoda and 3 other soldiers retreated into the jungle. Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, Private First Class Kinshichi Kozuka. 4 men. Dense jungle. The order to continue the mission, and a belief that the fighting around them was a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. Private Yuichi Akatsu continued the mission of its training until Great Barrage was left unable to with the fighting of depreciating the entire jungle. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over. On Lubang Island, Onoda and his men noticed the fighting had stopped. They concluded it was a temporary lull, a tactical pause before the next phase of the war. In October 1945, leaflets were dropped into the jungle with the message, "The war ended on August 15th. Come down from the mountains." Onoda studied the leaflet carefully. On Lubang Island, Onoda and his men noticed the fighting had stopped. No one had recalled him. Therefore, the war was not over. Over the following years, the Japanese and American governments made multiple attempts to reach Onoda's group. Surrender orders signed by General Yamashita were dropped by air, rejected, possibly forged by the enemy. In 1952, letters from the soldiers' own families urging surrender, along with family photographs, were dropped from aircraft. Onoda's group studied them carefully. The photographs could have been faked. The letters could have been written under duress. Every piece of evidence that the war had ended was interpreted through the logic of his training as enemy deception. Because an enemy clever enough to construct this level of deception was exactly the enemy his training had prepared him for. One by one, the group diminished. In September 1949, Private Akatsu separated from the group. After 6 months alone in the jungle, he surrendered to Philippine forces in March 1950. Onoda considered it desertion, a betrayal. In May 1954, Corporal Shimada was killed in a shootout with a Philippine army unit. Now there were two, Onoda and Kozuka, moving through the jungle, conducting raids, surviving on coconuts, bananas, and whatever they could steal from farms, keeping the mission alive. One former cannibal, a neutral boss Scott, was exposed to the Shoppenbrahman sufferance when a body before surgical dire social Corporal Shimada was killed in mid-app. This is the part of the story that is often omitted. Onoda and his companion were not simply hiding in the jungle. They were conducting what they called guerrilla operations, raiding farms, burning rice stores, attacking people they believed were enemy combatants or collaborators. Approximately 30 Filipino civilians were killed over the course of the 3 decades. Farmers, fishermen, ordinary people going about their lives on an island that had been at peace since 1945. Families were destroyed, children lost parents, an entire island community lived in a state of fear from 2 men who did not know or refused to accept that the war was over. Onoda hid in his kora. On October 19, 1972, Private Kozuka was killed in a shootout with local police during a farm raid. He had been Onoda's companion for 27 years. His body was identified. The news reached Japan, where Onoda had been officially declared dead in 1959. The realization that Onoda was still alive, still fighting, reached the Japanese public and caused a sensation. And now, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Hiro Onoda was completely alone. In February 1974, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki arrived on Lubang Island. He had told friends before leaving Japan that he was going to look for 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. He found Onoda after 4 days of searching. Muflin Sama said, "This town's better." The 2 men talked. Suzuki told Onoda the war had ended 29 years ago. Onoda listened carefully and then said he could not surrender. Not to a civilian, not without orders. His commanding officer had told him to continue until he was personally relieved of duty. Until that officer came to this island and gave that order, Onoda would continue his mission. Suzuki took photographs, proof that Onoda was alive, and returned to Japan. The Japanese government tracked down Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, Onoda's former commanding officer. He was no longer a soldier. He was a bookseller, running a small shop in rural Japan. He was asked to fly to the Philippines, to walk into a jungle, and formally relieve a soldier of a mission that had officially ended before most people alive in 1974 had been born. On March 9, 1974, Major Taniguchi walked into the jungle on Lubang Island and found Hiro Onoda. He read the official orders in formal military language. His Imperial Majesty's Armed Forces had ceased all military activities. He was to cease all military activities and place himself under the command of the nearest Philippine military representatives. Onoda stood still for a long moment. Then he broke down. He later wrote that he was furious, not at Taniguchi, but at the fact that the mission he had given 30 years of his life to was over, that everything he had endured had been for a war that had ended before he was 24. Major pause. On March 11, 1974, Hiro Onoda emerged from the jungle of Lubang Island. He was wearing his Imperial Japanese Army uniform, preserved and maintained for nearly 3 decades in the tropical jungle. He was carrying his service rifle, still functioning. He was 52 years old. He had entered the jungle at 22. He had formal ceremony. He presented his sword to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, who pardoned him for his wartime actions on the island. The pardon did not require any investigation into the civilian deaths. The families of those who had died received nothing. When Onoda returned to Japan, he was greeted by a crowd of 8,000 people. National television covered his arrival live. Conservative politicians embraced him as a symbol of traditional Japanese values, loyalty, perseverance, duty. He sold his memoir. He gave interviews. He became, briefly, the most famous man in Japan. On Lubang Island, the reaction was different. When word spread that Onoda was being pardoned in a televised ceremony, Locals who had lived in fear of him for decades, and the families of those he had killed, had to be physically restrained from the ceremony site. Onoda found Japan unrecognizable. The country he had given 30 years to no longer resembled the one he had left. The militarist culture that had produced him was gone. The values he had sacrificed everything for were no longer national values. He moved to Brazil, where he established a cattle ranch and lived quietly for years. He eventually returned to Japan and established a nature school for young people, the Onoda Shizenjuku, where he tried to pass on skills of outdoor survival and self-reliance to a generation he felt had grown too dependent on modern comfort. Onoda's story raises questions that have no easy answers. He was loyal, but his loyalty killed innocent people who had nothing to do with his war. He was disciplined, but his discipline was in service of a mission that had ceased to exist before it properly began. He was given an order he followed to the letter, but the people who gave that order never imagined it would be interpreted this way, for this long. He received dozens of pieces of evidence that the war was over and rejected every one, not because he was stupid, but because his training had specifically prepared him to reject exactly this kind of evidence. A system that was designed to make him impossible to deceive, made him impossible to reach. Hiro Onoda died on January 16, 2014. He was 91 years old. He had lived long enough to see the internet, smartphones, and a Japan that had become one of the world's leading democracies. He never fully reconciled his view of what he had done with the world's view of it. To himself, he had been a soldier doing his duty. To the families on Lubang Island, he had been something else entirely. Both of these things were true, and the space between them is where the real story lives. Lubang Island today is quiet. The jungle where Onoda hid for 30 years still stands. The farms he raided have been rebuilt. The families he left behind have grown old and had children of their own. Most of the world knows Hiro Onoda as a remarkable story of loyalty and endurance. On Lubang Island, they remember something more complicated. A soldier fought for 30 years because he was given an order and refused to believe it no longer applied. Whether that makes him a hero, a victim, or something else depends entirely on where you were standing when he finally put his rifle down. There are dozens of stories like this one that most people never hear. Subscribe and we'll keep finding them. The next file is already open.